Hello, welcome to the latest episode of Through the Pages. Today we have a heavyweight of a political book, not just because it's got a thick page count, but because god damn is it great. It's a shock Doctrine, Rise of Disaster Capitalism by Naomi Klein. This is the first book of hers I read. Instantly realized I will probably read all her books. I think No Logo remains maybe her biggest or second biggest to this, so that's probably where I'll head next. Drop a comment if you think there's a different book I should read next of hers. But this book, as the title explains, it is all about disaster capitalism, and it's about the worst manipulations of this economic system and how when bad things happen, there are people who know just what to do, not for the people, but for profit. And so it starts with analysis of Katrina and just how the city of New Orleans shifted after that, like the amount of public schools to charter schools, and then hurricane, build back all these schools, and they're all charter schools, very few public, same with public housing versus condominiums, everything restructured in a for-profit way. And the sad part of that is that when it's done, regardless of what the people on the ground recognize or what we can see through the news or however we're gathering our information, is that it really is not good. But when you look at the raw numbers of it, like GDP and that sort of thing, it is extremely profitable for a few, to the point where we can say the economy's great, that this is good. And so there's this warped idea that this sort of privatization and deregulation and this draining of public support is having a good effect. And in their argument for it, they are right. A very select few are profiting immense amounts, total profits. You could make the case for it, but there's no humanity to it. And so that's the case that she makes here. This book covers so much more than just Katrina or even just domestic politics. It really frames it. I mean, it is a look at America, first and foremost, I will say, but as basically like the West. And I think that's a great way to look at things. Like, if you look at things through the lens of only through like country by country, like, you'll miss some of the greater powers at work. And so she touches on not only the military industrial complex, but like what the West is, being, the UK, Canada, United States, parts of Europe, and that sort of group. You got the global South, you have the East, China, and then you have kind of the Soviet bloc, depending on the era that we're in, how much power they really have. But this book, because it does cover so much ground, was probably the most amount of notes I've ever taken on a book. Just going and going. So much good information, and just, it's not surprising information. It's not information I knew going in. There's generalities, like specifically with like the Iraq war, that were like, I was alive for that. I was cognizant of how wrong what was happening was. And like, so there's some aspects where it's like, it's just telling me about the trees in a forest I already kind of understood, like very specific bits where it's like, oh fuck. Like, there was a thing about like lobbyists, and how, if you're American these days, that's pretty much what moves our political system is lobbyists. And when it came to security firms, arms and all that sort of ecosystem and economy behind security, just as a big blanket term, there was 2 lobby groups pre 9/11. A few years later into the Iraq war, there were 543. 543 groups lobbying for the industry. That is a staggering turn of tides, and it's one of many. And so it really gives phenomenal detail through, the 2020 lens of hindsight at how the structure of the Iraq war was done in such a for-profit way, designed by the people who would profit from it, And that really wasn't the first time we've had something like that, but that was just the most explicit. Like, we've learned, we're doing this, we've got all the American people on our side because support the troops, right? So it not only dives deep into that, which would be expected, but deeper and deeper in history, going through the global south of Argentina, of Chile. And kind of the genesis of where all this comes from, this neoliberalism that stems from the University of Chicago, the economics department with Milton Friedman. And so it really details like the role that them and the Chicago boys, as they're known, played throughout the world, and the just horrible takes on economics that they would have. And before Chile, they really hadn't had a way to enact it. They had just been enticing people. It's like, this is what would work, but we haven't had a chance yet. And I was like, see, just give them a shot. This all on paper is all good. And then Chile was their grand experiment, and it was the first of several regime changes. They said, we have a genuine leftist taking power over there. That's bad for the West because they're going to want to stay a little more insular. If they have just natural, minerals or crops or what have you there, natural resources, word I was looking for, but they're going to want that value for themselves, and we need to be extracting it. And so it would replace them with a militaristic government, which we co-signed or basically helped enable, so that country would do the bidding of the West. And America, you could almost use that synonymous with the West, given how much of the power ends up in our hands, but it's a broader thing than just America versus the world. And it's staggering to see the effect America has had on the globe when you look at it through this lens. You could also look at it through the lens of, things we've done that are good. There's certainly that, and you could make the case that it's a very one-sided, but it's not meant to highlight all of the things that the country does in all ways, shape, and form. It's very specific on the effects of neoliberalism and just basically colonizing the world. And so I think, does a very good job of staying both narrow and broad. I really have enjoyed listening to some of her talks on YouTube, and I understand that there's a documentary. I think it's maybe an hour 15, and I think it's on YouTube. That's where I saw it pop up. But so I'll probably watch that as just a way to kind of like let the information sink in a little bit more, but also something to recommend to people if they're like, hey, I don't really want to read 600 or whatever pages on economics. And to which I would understand that. This book had been on my list for a very long time, and I had been kind of putting it off, and then turn of the year, I was like, all right, I want to cross off some of the big books of the year. Also, just, it's a little more economical buying the big books. So I've liked kind of sitting with this book for a long time and I feel like I didn't blaze through it. I sat with it. I did some digging along the way, took a lot of notes, and I felt like I really this was probably my favorite political book I've read. I think it's a book that decades down the line will still hit, and I think that's kind of hard to do with political books. I feel like so many often sort of have their moment and then the ship sails. I think of watching like a news program a few days later, and it's kind of like, oh, well, none of this even matters. We've moved on. The news cycle has moved on, or the situation has totally changed now. So it's not a situation that's changed anytime soon, and I think it's a missing element to the discussion on things like the Iraq War sometimes, where you're just like, oh, it's just business or whatever. It's like, no, it's a very distinct political ideology, and then it also dissects the parallel nature of politics and economics. Though they are separate, they run in congruent with each other, and this was instances where they got very succinct and really were right in line with each other. And so I think it's good to understand that, as people see a lot of anti-capitalist posts, but not anything to really back it up. Not to say no information to back it up, but nothing to if you're anti this, then what are you pro? That sort of thing. I think we just have a lot of what we don't like. And so I think having a better understanding of those things helps to form our opinions of how things should be versus just how they shouldn't be. And so I think this book does a really good job of just laying out a broad education on the way geopolitics have been working and how few people they have been working for. So if you'd like a taste of it, I would refer back to her interviews on YouTube. She has several on there, panel discussions, things where you really get a pulse on her and her voice. She's just phenomenal with words. In a book of 600 pages, as you can imagine, there's just so many sentences and paragraphs are just like, God damn, like, carve that into a wall, put that on the library. Like, that's a testament to the state of the, where it's just like, God, she said a lot in this book and said it very well. It wasn't jamming a bunch down our throats. Like, there was only a few chapters where I felt like it was a lot packed in there. There was one chapter on South Africa that it was just like, not independent of the rest, but it, like, I think like Chile had so much time and they're just like, all right, South Africa, and move on. It's like, admittedly didn't come into that with a ton of understanding of the area, the region, like what had been happening in politics in that area. But so I felt like that one was a little bit fast, but in general, it was very thorough without being boring. Like, I was always very engrossed, which I think is tough to do on a economics book that's as long as this one is. So if you've ever come across this and thought like, ooh, intriguing, and then thought like, ooh, that's too big, trust me, it's great. Not only is it great, but it's a very enjoyable read, which I think sometimes you can read political books and just be like, God damn. Like, I will say I snapped back to some fiction afterwards. You'll see the reviews of these two, also this one. But yeah, this has been my favorite book of the year so far. I'm only 4 books in, but hey, that's saying something. So if you've read other books from Naomi Klein, drop a comment below. I would like to know where to go. I also kind of wonder on the climate-related books, like, do those become a little dated as the issues change? And I mean, it's not that they change so much, like we're in a much better place or anything, but like, I think she has 2, and I wonder, like, is there purpose in reading the first one? So yeah, genuinely curious what else from Naomi Klein you would recommend or where to go next. But I think No Logo is probably where I'm heading. But thank you for watching. If you watched all the way to this, you're the man. You're awesome. Hit a little thumbs up. Let me know you're out there. Hit a little subscribe if you really want to make me smile.